leave the rest of it to Webster. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the wonderful introduction, and I hope you don't mind if I sit down, but we've been on the road now in Britain for a week, and with this wonderful turnout tonight, we're well over 500 people having come to these events. And if you have 500 people as cadre, as organizers for your movement, if everybody in that group can give 10 hours a week, that's 5,000 hours, and with 5,000 man-hours per week, you can change this country. You can roll back false flag terrorism, and you can give a very important contribution towards the peace of the world, because you are, of course, here in Britain, very much in the center of the international public opinion. Now here we go with false flags, right? 400 years of it. I won't tell you every one, though, because I'm going to try to finish up a little bit quicker. Maybe we can get through in 90 minutes. But I would ask, since this is not, the gathering at Wembley or Albert Hall, why don't you raise the issues as we go along, right? If you have questions, comments, criticisms, don't wait. Let's get right in and hold it up, and that'll even give my voice a rest, which is maybe not in the best of all shape, but we're going to do what we can. So as you see, we had Guy Fawkes, at least in England. I don't know if you have it. I guess you do. You? Here, too? Guy Foxe, pick up here? All right, great. So we had that in England on Monday, and of course the idea is that that is one of the most successful false flags of all time. Now I take a little bit at the beginning with advertisements for myself. If you want to keep up with what I'm doing in terms of analysis on world affairs, that would be World Crisis Radio. You can see it, you can listen to it on gcnlive.com. It's every Saturday, 2 to 4 p.m. New York time, so so 7 to 9 p.m. here on Saturday, and we also have actindependent.org, where you can keep up with the political side of what I do, which includes 9/11 Truth, but it also takes it a bit further, as I think you'll see in a minute. Now, this tour is taking place in the midst of a tremendous world crisis, world emergency. We're on the brink of World War III. If you didn't know that, Bush has told it to you, so you better take that seriously. Putin has said we're in a new Cuban Missile Crisis. That's also true. So what we're trying to do here is take aim at this question of gullibility, the propensity of people to believe, to swallow the false flag story, right? To believe in it, to be a sucker, to be a dupe. If we had a more intelligent world population, more politically sophisticated, not so naive, it would be almost impossible for somebody like Cheney to do what he does. Now, let me also say, when I say somebody like Cheney, I'm referring to a faction. It is strictly speaking the Rupert Murdoch, Warren Buffett, George Shultz, don't forget him, faction of the Anglo-American banking establishment. Whenever I say Cheney, I'm trying to use a shorthand so we get to the heart of the matter. Right? Don't tell me then that I personalize everything in Cheney, because I don't. It's just that this is a way you can sum it up so people can understand, after all, what you're talking about. If it weren't for the gullibility of world public opinion, they wouldn't be able to even hope to do any of these things. Now, as you know, I'm the author of this book. We hope to sell out. We've got 6 copies left. I hope you don't make the wonderful people that brought me here take those all the way back to London and Bristol. Tomorrow I'm going to Italy. I'm going to be on book tour in Italy next week. This is my Italian edition, the most up-to-date of all my editions, La Fabbrica del Terrore. I believe I'm going to be joined in Milan by Dario Fo, a Nobel Prize winner in literature, because reading my book seems to like it and wants to come to the book tour. That'll sell some books too. This is my French edition. This came out about a year ago. I'm also going to be stopping off there, so it's sort of busboy's holiday here for me. This is my Bush book, of course. If you're broke, and I've been broke, can get it for free, tarpley.net. It's been up there for 11 years now, 11 years plus. It's the oldest continuous anti-Bush website in the world that I know of. And this is the one that has Prescott Bush, grandfather of the current tenant of the White House, supporting Hitler as a Nazi. This is my first book that I co-wrote, directed, Who Killed Aldo Moro, 1978. And our finding was, of course, it was NATO intelligence. And we thought, well, if we put a US flag, it's so common, nobody will notice. NATO flag, nobody knows what it is. So we said, let's put the British up there and we'll get the NATO intelligence angle across. So that's my understanding of this entire 9/11 stuff comes out of the studies of the Bader-Meinhof group, the Red Brigades, Central European spheres of influence, and geopolitical terrorism designed to defend the Yalta line of demarcation in the late 70s and early 80s. Very timely now that everybody's been northern rocked and countrywide. We have surviving the cataclysm. You can get the idea, right? The Federal Reserve breaks into pieces. The IMF is shattered into pieces. And let me tell you, if you've been following the advice I give you for your personal finance in this book, you would not have lost a penny on Northern Rock because you would have been heavily invested in gold and some other stuff. Against Oligarchy is a collection which will come out in print, I hope, sometime soon. It's been all over the internet, it's scattered. I'll refer to it at different times. Now, as a result of all of this publishing, I am actually not completely obscure, believe it or not, and I have been on CNN and Fox News, you see here, with the neo-fascist commentator Hannity here, a bully, a Bushy, and the History Channel, anyway, something of a public figure. So what I hope to do is to use whatever notoriety I have to essentially warn you now of the situation that we're in. And of course, as everybody knows, the current emergency revolves around the Middle East, but with overtones of world war. We have the war going on in Iraq. We've got terrorism coming out of this Kurdish enclave, going into Turkey, going into Iran, acts of war being committed by the United States continuously against Iran. We've got a losing war going on in Afghanistan, and of course the British troops there are having losses. Canadian troops also. Terrible situation. We've got Pakistan now being destabilized. I'll talk about that. But the big question is the hysterical desire of the Cheney group to launch this big attack against Iran. This now overshadows everything else in the world. We have been lurching for three and a half years along the brink of a wider war with Iran. And it's a miracle we haven't already pitched over the precipice into some kind of an abyss. But Cheney, again, Cheney faction is what it always means, keeps trying and trying, and if we don't really do something about Cheney, like impeach him, and somehow break the power of this group symbolically through that, we face a wider war in Iran, which means a slide into World War III, because you'll see the way the war would begin in Iran is that Russians and Chinese would be killed. The ultimate goal of 9/11 and of this current operation is to put into practice the clash of civilizations, the war of civilizations. This person here, Huntington, is the king of the neocons. He's the most important of all neocons by far. More important than PNAC or these other things, because he's telling you already 10 or 12 years ago what the idea is, a new world order based on the clash of civilizations. And that is the overarching goal that they have. What they're saying, in effect, is that US and British world domination can only be salvaged if everybody else is at each other's throats all the time. And here's what it comes down to. Iran up here, Saudi Arabia over here, the fabled Straits of Hormuz. Now this has been a choke point of the world oceans for centuries, of course. The Portuguese colonial empire was pivoted on the Straits of Hormuz in the 1500s and the 1600s. Now, if you attack Iran in the way that Cheney proposes to do, what you're going to get is all of this coastline becomes a shooting gallery with torpedoes, mines, tanks, cannons, RPGs, bazookas, just about anything, catapults, burning oil slicks, you name it, that will be used to interdict the tanker traffic here and the freighter traffic in the Gulf. And here, of course, it gets very narrow. Here you can even sink some hulks in the channel and block it that way. And that is 1/3 of the world's oil goes through there, coming out. Going in, it happens to be all the supplies for the US forces in Iraq. And you have these little islands, and this is going to be a disaster. This Gulf, by the way, is so narrow that to take an aircraft carrier into there is suicidal folly. I've talked to carrier admirals. They say even the Mediterranean, you feel very, very narrow. And of course, this is much, much worse. You don't need even to sink all the ships. You just have to get the maritime insurance up so high that it can't be done profitably. That happened back in the Kuwaiti reflagging crisis. So if you attack Iran, of course, they will have the right of self-defense under the Charter, and they will undoubtedly lash out. So what this means is oil at $500 or $1,000 a barrel, the utter crash of the dollar. I think the pound cannot escape the dollar crash because of the euro-dollar market in London. This will be the end of the world as you've known it. It will turn into a very hungry, very dark, very cold world. And it's important, therefore, to mobilize now to prevent this from happening. Again, for people who are younger, you have your own life to look forward to. For people who have children, you must fight for the lives of your children. And for people who are getting on in years, you're obviously concerned about the survival of civilization and what all of this leads to. So I urge you to think about activism. I come not to regale you, but to recruit you. I come to call you to activism, not to edify you with knowledge, but to give you the concepts you need so that you can be ready for the terrible things that unfortunately seem now to be in the offing for us. And I'm sure that you can be a great asset for humanity. The other thing, of course, is the situation of these US forces in Iraq. Very, very bad, because the supply line runs along the Iranian front, right? This is the so-called Route Tampa, 2 roads, 400 miles long. All you need is some bazookas. You can interdict that. And that would mean then that these US forces up here will have no water, no food, no ammunition, no fuel. And what will they fix? Well, they'll have Dunkirk if they're lucky. Maybe some of them can be flown out. But for the other ones, it'll be Stalingrad or Dien Bien Phu, which is a good colonial precedent. So this whole situation is absolute insanity. The neocons know that they're defeated conventionally, but they're obsessed with the idea that they can escalate to the nuclear level. Now, how can it be done? This is Brzezinski, you know him. He was advisor to Carter. This is not a friend of mine. He's a very bad person. He started the Afghan war, but let's listen to what he says. This is his testimony to the Senate Foreign Relations Committee on February 1st. He says, there is right now in action a plausible scenario for military collision with Iran, which is based on a terrorist act in the US blamed on Iran, meaning a false flag. It's very interesting he says this, because this basically concedes a lot of our 9/11 truth movement ideas, because he's saying that they're preparing it. I mean, he doesn't quite say it, but it's clear. So the problem that the Cheney group has is that they're not getting their idea through the interagency policy process, right? The normal channels are not working for them. So their natural response is, well, if we're facing a bureaucratic logjam where people in the Pentagon don't want to do this, the State Department doesn't want to do it, the Treasury doesn't want to do it, lots of people don't want to do it. In the military, we have the we don't want to die faction. They don't want to do it. Right? The neocon says, look at that meat grinder, you go in there, it's Iran. And the military guy says, no, you put on the uniform and you go. And your children go, Mr. Neocon. This has actually happened. Cheney's natural response is the outside event, the manufactured incident, the false flag. That can be two things. It can be a new 9/11 in the form of a super 9/11, right, with nuclear weapons in an American city. That's the Cheney, classic Cheney doctrine. That's then what you use to attack Iran and impose martial law. Or it can be a Gulf of Tonkin, like the incidents in the middle of 1964 that were the basis of the Vietnam War. The US government admitted about 2 years ago that the Gulf of Tonkin was a fraud. I hope you know that, because that's important. So the idea is to attack Iran, and we have come close. Now we've come twice this year, we've come to the brink. Back in March, April, around Operation Bite. Remember when the British personnel were rounded up and held prisoner? That was a preparation for a strike. Didn't happen. It didn't happen because Putin issued a warning, because the Iranians didn't fall for provocations, and because there was resistance inside the US structures. Now here we have the Rogue B-52. This is August 29th and 30th. How many have heard of this? Okay, well, I guess a lot haven't, so let me try to go through this a little bit. It's a B-52, and it's loaded, as you see here, with 6 cruise missiles, right? They're loaded on like this. It's loaded on the 29th of August in Minot, North Dakota. Sorry. It's loaded up here in North Dakota, and it's flown 3.5 hours to Shreveport, Louisiana, Barksdale Air Force Base, on the 30th of August. Now, it's the greatest security breach in Air Force history, because they're not supposed to transport these missiles with nuclear warheads by air. They had no permission to do this. It looks like a rogue network, I would say identical to the 9/11 network. It was the people who brought you 9/11 now tried to bring you this event, the September criminals, the 9/11 networks. But when this one gets to Louisiana, for some reason, it stops. Why does it stop? We don't really know, but there's good indication from Wayne Madsen, good website. He has a lot of contacts in the National Security Agency. That the thing that stopped it is essentially what they would call a mutiny. That the Air Force personnel involved said, no, we won't do this. We are not war criminals for you. We do not obey illegal orders. We will not ship these nukes to the Middle East. Because the idea was that this is the place from which they routinely fly to Iran and back, or the Middle East and back. And of course, with those cruise missiles, you get a couple of extra 1,000 miles. So it comes to a halt, as far as we know. On the 30th, it's then announced on the 5th of September. The complicating factors now are that 6 people involved in this are dead. We're going to show you them in a minute. And one of the missiles seems to be still missing, in spite of a day, September 14th, when they shut down the entire Air Force to find what had been going wrong. So here's the idea. This is what it looks like when they took them off. This is the actual plane in Barksdale. And here are some of the Air Force personnel. This is a captain. This is a lieutenant, I think. This is an airman, but he's part of the security detail. This is actually the lieutenant. And therefore, these people and some others have been killed in what are called traffic accidents. It's a kind of a grassy knoll phenomenon. That they're people who, they're involved in this, we think, on one side or the other, not clear which side. Very likely they're part of the people who said no, but that's not 100% sure either. Now I think this is important because I was part of this Kenny Bunkport warning on August 26th, which was a call for the immediate impeachment of Cheney as a war avoidance measure, and to make it easier for loyal and patriotic military officers to refuse illegal orders coming from the Cheney faction. And we warned here, and I would say it again, if weapons of mass destruction go off anywhere in the world, you must think, not Bin Laden, not Al-Qaeda, not the Cave, not Hezbollah, none of this stuff, not Syria, no, no, no. You must think Cheney and Cheney and Cheney. His backers, his office, his faction, them. And you've got to be able to take that into the public domain. Hell for leather. You've got to basically, by the way, they have a war plan. Do you? If the war starts tomorrow, you know what to do? You got a good plan for a demo? You should have basically, everybody should know, if the war starts, we gather for a demo someplace. Right? We've got to be, and to show the people here, somebody's fighting, we don't accept it. My friend Kevin Barrett, you know him, the Muslim who got kicked out of the University of Wisconsin, he designed these big plastic signs saying inside job. And he said the purpose was for the next one. In other words, what you can do with this plastic stuff, you know, you can get several hundred of them for $200. You can get 500 of these things. You can take the biggest monument in Edinburgh and wrap it. You can put these things all around the outside. Inside job, like that French artist who wraps buildings. You can wrap a building with inside job, like ribbons, like tape. You know what I mean? Like for Christmas. Anyway, you've got to be ready to do that kind of thing. And you've got to have your own plan for what you do if war breaks out. And it's got to include mucho call-ins to radio talk shows and say, we're against the war, no, 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 hell no, we won't go, and on and on and on. Okay, now, there have also been other provocations. October 16th, the U.S. launched a Patriot missile in Qatar. This is very close to Iran, you've just seen it. This is what the battery looks like in the desert, so they just shot one of these up in the air just to see what the Iranians would do. If they were suckers, they might fall for it, they might launch some missiles or do something stupid otherwise. Now there's a huge campaign. British intelligence has made itself the laughing stock of the world in the Politkovskaya and Litvinenko affairs. Right? The British have just gone absolutely bonkers on Russia with not a scrap of proof. I mean, the person to look at in all of these things is a certain guy called Berezovsky, need I say more, but not Russia as far as I can see. So I welcome the fact that Putin is the most intelligent head of state in the world. I welcome the return of Russia. I think it is extremely important to balance the neocon fascist madmen. I would say without Putin, the United States would already be a police state, because this is somebody who knows how to say no. We'll see him several times during the evening. I think we have to welcome the return of Russia and the idea of a balance in international affairs, not just the one-way street of U.S. hegemony, but somebody who can put some kind of resistance into the field, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Now, Putin has said to Bush, don't you dare attack Iran. He has compared Bush to being a madman with a razor. Martin, you forgot to do the cell phone alert. Martin's out, I speculate where. He's compared Bush to a madman with a razor, and he said that we're in a new Cuban Missile Crisis. Now, if the president of Russia says we're in a new Cuban Missile Crisis, then we are. The Russians have also been testing, and they have tested in the month of October, this Topol-M intercontinental ballistic missile. It is simply the most capable ICBM in the world, much better than anything the US has. It can dodge all kinds of defenses. It's unstoppable. And this is now a factor preventing war. If you want to know why we don't have the war already, three things. Putin, they're afraid of him. Forces inside the US government, or NATO, and British, I think also, who don't want to have the war. And then there's us, right, the movement. So we can throw something in there ourselves. So this is what the Cheney group faces. Now, on October 17th, we crossed the Rubicon, or the red line, into insanity with an act of incalculable folly, which is even to say World War III. You don't want to say World War III. It is a taboo. It should be a taboo. The taboo has now been broken by this cocaine-infested moron. You don't want to let him drag you into World War III. In other words, you've got to defend your children and your lives and everything you've ever built up against a very superficial fellow, right? A dry drunk and a cocaine addict, all the rest of it. Somebody who is pumped up with psychopharmaca every day, without a doubt. And he's got these handlers, mainly women around him. Handlers are mainly women who tell him how great he is. We can go through this in some detail. Anyway, you're not supposed to say World War III. The very act of saying it brings it closer. Now, Bush has invented, you know, in the 1930s, people used to walk around making a certain gesture. Well, Bush has got he's got his own variation. Look, remember it used to be like this? Now, Bush says, no, do it my way. So the point is, though, that we are now in the the realm of the strange loves, right? We are in the world of Dr. Strangelove. And again, you've got to fight back, because now this is the issue. And I've been putting this stuff up for quite a while, and people said, well, aren't you overdoing it? Not when Bush says World War III, I'm sorry. This is quite timely. Now, the destabilization of Pakistan, just to deal with that for a second. I'm noticing also the BBC is absolutely foaming at the mouth. I'm seeing radios foaming at the mouth and televisions that are foaming. What happened here was, this is at the end of February, and our dear friend Cheney goes to visit President Musharraf of Pakistan. And what is Cheney's message? He's saying, you are the Eastern Front of the battle against Iran. You will join in our attack on Iran. You will use your atomic bomb. Your Islamic bomb will be used to nuke Iran, if necessary, under our orders. And Musharraf, I think much to his credit, simply says no. At that point, the destabilization that you now see begins. The New York Times published a list of generals saying, here are a bunch of Pakistani generals the U.S. would be glad to see organize a coup against Musharraf. I think Mrs. Bhutto has been criminally irresponsible. She is obviously a foreign agent working for the U.S. and the British. She wants to basically put Pakistan under receivership, going back to colonialism under London and Washington. This is an absolutely insane proposition. So whatever you think of Musharraf, give him a break, cut him some slack. I think he's a patriotic person. He's the only one who seems to be fighting for the survival of his country. And Mrs. Bhutto is an absolute incendiary. Maybe she wants to steal another $1 billion. Now, Cheney also went to Afghanistan with Karzai. Karzai was also cool. Karzai said, well, you know, I've got to get along with Iran. I can't get involved in that. So something may happen to him too. So the triumph of death, as viewed by Bruegel, now extends over our future. And again, if you don't like this, if you don't want to find yourself in this kind of a scene, ask yourself what you can do. If you have an hour, call into a radio station. If you have 6 hours, create a truth squad, go confront a poobah. And if you have 500 to 1,000 hours over the next year or two, run for parliament, or whatever there is to run for. The conditions are changing here so fast, I don't quite know what it is, but if it's Westminster or Edinburgh right here, you take your pick, you run for the one you want, and remember, the question of stopping World War III is a matter of individual responsibility. Time magazine has assured you that you are the person of the year, right? Everybody here. So again, if we can educate the world public opinion so that we get beyond this crazy world of false flag terrorism, it becomes almost impossible for the Cheney group to apply this discredited method once again. So if you never figured out what 9/11 was, it's a mind-up, it's a made it happen on purpose. And you've got to get through that fast. You've got basically buy that book, read it over the weekend, come back on Monday, ready to go, knowing what false flag is. Now, just a few things about Guy Fawkes. This, of course, is the most famous, most successful false flag of all time, I think. Although, well, if we go back another 100 or 200 years, there were other competing ones. But here he is. He's Guy Fawkes. He's got his lantern, his key, and his spurs, because he's going to get out of town. It's nighttime. This is the House of Lords. And lo and behold, just by coincidence, a bunch of people find out that he's going in there to set off these huge barrels of powder the next morning when the King, the Lords, and the Commons all come trooping in. This person is a patsy. He is a dupe. He's a useful idiot, and he doesn't know it, but he's actually working for the English Prime Minister, Lord Robert Cecil, the Prime Minister of the country who is running this entire thing. Now, we won't go into a lot of details of it, but these are the conspirators. The ones that I want to point out, well, here's Fawkes, but the two ones that really count are Catesby, see Catesby here, and Percy. Catesby and Percy, because those are both documented agents working for Lord Cecil. They go into Lord Cecil's house at night in the days leading up to the discovery of the plot. So imagine this. 2 members of the devil's own gunpowder plot are going undercover at night to the office of the Prime Minister to discuss matters with people in there, maybe with him personally or maybe with one of his deputies. The rest of these people, Winter, Fawkes, the Wright brothers, this Bates over here, the servant, they're dupes. They're fanatics, they're psychotics, they're useful idiots, whatever they are. But they are being used as grist for Cecil's mill. And all of them are going to be killed. Because the double agents, well, the patsies don't know they're in an operation. They don't know that it's a controlled operation being run by the government, that it's a state plot. The double agents think they know what the whole story is going to be because they've been promised that they will survive. But as you'll see, they're not going to survive. Now, what does this tell us? Then, now. Then, and now. It is exactly the same method. Now, none of these people has ever been proven to have come anywhere near 9/11. Absolutely no proof. But we do know that Atta and a couple of the others are double agents. We know that some of them are living on U.S. military bases in Florida, in California. We know that some of them have an FBI agent as a roommate who never turns them in. We know that they never get arrested. And we'll tell you some more about some of these people in a minute. Here's the House of Lords then, this thing. There's a house next door. They rent this house, and we'll see how. And then they first try to dig a tunnel, starting in 1604. But that's really a lot of work. So eventually they say, forget this house, forget the tunnel. They make a new start, and they just say, let's rent the cellar here. Let's get some huge barrels of gunpowder, you'll see where, and put them in there, and we'll blow the whole thing up. Now the problem with this is, you're going to blow up everybody, right? Kings, lords, and commons. There are lots and lots of Catholics that are going to get killed. There's lots and lots of Catholics. They're, Catholic lords. What sense does this make? If you really wanted to do something, you'd go after Cecil personally, because he's the one who's demanding the repression of the Catholics. But they don't do that. So because the whole thing has been created by Cecil. Now here's an interesting story. Who rented this house from which they start the entire thing? This is Sir Dudley Carleton. Now, since he did this, do you think they chopped his head off? Do you think they threw him in the Tower of London and he never saw the light of day? Did they deport him? Did they exile him? No. He became ambassador to Venice, and then he became the foreign secretary. So he got about as high as you can get in the government. Now, this is an interesting story. If people appear in one plot, and they do very badly, like our generals, right, in the U.S. on 9/11, the Air Force generals, if they get promoted after that, you really have to wonder what's going on here. Now, this is a pattern. If people show up as bunglers and fools and incompetents in one action, and then they go straight to the top of the government, what do you know? There's something wrong, and they're not the innocent people that they said they were. Now here's Fawkes, of course, the most famous patsy of all time. These words like guy, you guys and dolls, that's him. That word comes into the language, to be a guy. How about a fall guy? That's him again. He's the fall guy, he takes the fall. A guy wire, if you're going to build your effigy, right, of the huge Guy Fawkes doll for the holiday, right, for the bonfires, you got to have a guy wire to hold him up because he might fall over. So we have all this. So today, of course, we have the Patsy bin Laden and the Patsy Atta. Now, how about this guy? Is he Islamic? Well, he eats pork. He drinks liquor like a man. He takes cocaine. He lives with a prostitute with orange hair. He loves the Beastie Boys, and his hobby, or what he does when he gets cross, is he takes the kittens and cats that this woman holds as pets and pulls them apart, and he leaves the body parts scattered over the rug to try to show that he's angry with her. Now in those days, it was your own James I, right? So he's now the King of England. The goal of the plot is not to eliminate him. but it's to make him do certain things. To keep Cecil as prime minister, to keep oppressing the Catholics, and ultimately to go to war with Spain. Because the plot is going to be blamed on the Pope and the Jesuits, as you know. And today, it's Bush. I hope you don't believe that Bush is a mastermind of the plot. Good, that's wonderful. This absurdity falls with its own weight. The goal is to make him do certain things. Now, with this guy, his normal tendency, of course, is to do nothing. To be catatonic. To sit there, he can sit in his office for about half an hour a day. Otherwise, he's got to sleep 8 to 10 hours. He's got to have 2 to 3 hours of exercise, entertainment. His work day is about 30 minutes. So his tendency is to do nothing. So 9/11 is something that forces him into this hyperactive mode, and then he does things, and once it gets going, it's done. If you want to know more about gunpowder, I would urge you to look at Francis Edwards. He's a Jesuit living in London, elderly. He's written about all the plots of the Elizabethan period, the Throckmorton, the Ridolfi, a whole bunch of others. He's written about the plots under James I. Maybe you know, James I's father was blown up by a bunch of Scottish noblemen in his own castle. That's one. And then James I once claimed that there was a plot called the Gowrie plot to blow him up. And he said that he had escaped that. So this notion of gunpowder plots and James go together. Here's another good book you can read, another Jesuit. And they're the ones who take the Catholic side, of course. Now, again, remember that this whole period, 1559 to 1612, you think it's Elizabeth and James, but it's really the Cecils. The country has been turned over to the Cecils who are ruling it. And they believe that the only way they can keep power is to play the Protestants against the Catholics and manipulate both of them that way. Now, today, same idea. You've got to play the Muslims and the Arabs and the Pakistanis against the rest of the population. The method is absolutely identical. Here's William Cecil, the elder one. Shakespeare knows him, Shakespeare hates him. You know Polonius and Hamlet? This guy who, he gives these good advice while he's basically prostituting his daughter. He gives these maxims to his son on how to live an upright and righteous life, and he's trying to use his own daughter to get social advancement. Shakespeare knows him, Shakespeare hates him. Shakespeare, of course, is a Catholic. He's a Catholic activist, he's a Catholic subversive. He hates these people because they're oppressing the Catholics. Now, the right-hand man of William Cecil, you just saw him also on his donkey, is the famous Walsingham. He's the founder of MI6, the founder of the Secret Intelligence Service. And the interesting thing about him, this is a little sidelight we're going to have here in the next few minutes. His training is who? He's trained by the most expert power in secret intelligence matters. Venice! Venice! The Venetians! That's where the method comes from. And he was, under Bloody Mary, he was forced to go to Padua, Venice. And he learns there how to do these things. And that's the key to all these plots. The Elizabethan plots, the Jacobean plots, and so forth. So remember, the founder of the MI6 is a Venetian. Now, Cecil the Younger, this is also somebody that Shakespeare knows. Shakespeare hates him. He appears as Richard III, the bloody tyrant and manipulator. He appears as Caliban, the misshapen creature in The Tempest, because he's a hunchback. Shakespeare uses that to get after him. And also Lord Angelo in Measure for Measure, a hypocrite, again, who spouts moralisms while he's essentially trying to abuse women. Now here's Elizabeth I. You see her gown here? I don't know if you can see what's on here, right? The best seats in here are always in the front, right? They're empty seats up here. If you want to see the slides better. But if you look at it, it's the rainbow portrait, so-called. Her gown is covered with eyes and ears. Eyes and ears, because she presides over a police state. And it's based on surveillance. Your closed-circuit TV and all the rest of this stuff you have today, well, it starts with her. Eyes and ears. She's also got a huge snake on her arm. A snake. Anyway, this is altogether sinister, this portrait, but this, I think, is a fairly good idea of what's going on. So again, the goal of gunpowder is to keep Cecil in power, keep the oppression of the Catholics going as an excuse for a police state so they can stay in power, and to have a war with Spain. Why have a war with Spain? He doesn't really want to have a war with Spain. He wants to marry his family to Spain. Tries very hard. Because the Venetians want England to be at war with Spain. And why is that? The Venetians are afraid the Spanish are going to come after them. The Spanish are in Milan, in northern Italy at this time. The Venetians are afraid they're going to get attacked by Spain, and therefore they want the Spanish to be constantly at war, far away from Venice, with powerful enemies, and England would fill the bill. That's geopolitics, right? Embroil your enemies in a war far away from you, and they'll never get any dangerous thoughts about you. And of course, we're familiar now with the constant repetition of images in 9/11. How many times have you seen films of the buildings coming down? 5,000 times, 10,000 times? More times than you want.
No, it's the planes doing it.
Huh?
They show us the planes studying it. They don't
Yeah?
show many of the
Well, whatever. The images, anyway. In this case, we have the images of the gunpowder plot, right? Let's just sample a few. We've seen this one before. How about this one? Divine illumination reveals Fawkes trying to get into the House of Lords. Here's another one. He's got the lantern. He's also got his own head skewered on the roof. This is the House of Lords. How about this one? The gunpowder here, Fawkes over here, divine illumination points him out. Here we have the devil helpfully guiding him in, the devil showing him what to do. Here, in this one, they've collapsed it all. The king is up here already. The king never came, and the king was never going to come, because it's a prorogued parliament, and the king is not going to make a speech. So the whole idea that James was ever going to be there is just not true. Here's another one. The Pope meeting with the devil taking Fawkes into the gunpowder chamber of the House of Lords up here. This is in several European languages. Guy Fawkes' lantern, still on display in Oxford. And a German version, right? This is a better version. Here's Bates. And again, the two double agents, Catesby and Percy, who make sure that everything goes as they want it to. Okay, so then and now. Now, interestingly, Catesby and Percy, when the plot is discovered, if you were Catesby and Percy and the plot is discovered, what would you do? Flee, go to France, get out on the water. They don't do that. They go into the heart of England. They go here to Shakespeare country, right, in Warwick, Stratford-on-Avon. You know why they go there? Because that's where everybody's a Catholic. The Catholics are a very large minority in England, or maybe they're the majority. Nobody knows, because it's been suppressed. What they try to do here is to go here and start an armed rebellion. And you know why? Because Cecil wants all of his enemies to come out in the open with guns so he can chop them down, cut them down. And that's how Catesby and Percy get killed. They've been promised that they will survive. But Cecil sends a special sharpshooter with a special mission to kill both of them. And they both get shot by the special sharpshooter. So if you're a double agent, you're expendable. Don't ever forget it. Now, what was used as gunpowder? Well, what it used is not gunpowder, but corn powder. It's an explosive, but it's very coarse and very inferior. And in this case, it's decayed or inert. Probably 100 years old or something at the time, you know, and waterlogged or something like this. So here's the Public Record Office. The War Office reports that the powder from the House of Lords has been returned, meaning that they lent it, and now it's coming back, and it's decayed corn powder. Daily Telegraph, 1978. So now we have to change the name to the Decayed Corn Powder Plot of 1605, propagation by Cecil, using so-called Catholic double agents as patsies. Ben Jonson is part of the plot. This is important because Ben Jonson works for Cecil. He's the playwright, right? He's the enemy of Shakespeare, needless to say. And what this shows is that Jonson, after the plot goes off, is in touch with the Venetian embassy. And the point of this just is to show you that Venetian intelligence, Venetian spies and provocateurs are active in London. And I have found virtually no writer who has ever paid any attention to this fact, that the Venetians are there in the background. And we'll get to the Venetians again in a second. Now, how about torture? Bush says, if we do it, it's not torture. Right? If somebody else does it, it may be torture, but if the US does it, it's not torture, whatever it is. Well, how about Fawkes? His signature before anything, after some torture, after more torture. How about this? Was he tortured from here to here, before and after? Looks like heavy-duty torture to me. Now, Winter confesses, probably tortured. There's a letter where he says, I'll write you my confession as soon as my hand is back together again. But how about this? This is Winter's signature, T-O-U-R. See it? There's the confession, T-E-R. Now, in 9/11, of course, we may have voice synthesizers at work. In this case, Cecil has got these handwriting experts who can fake anybody's handwriting, except they make mistakes. And again, look. His real signature and on the confession. Is it a forgery? I think so, huh? Here's another one. This is another confession. The Attorney General is this guy Cook. Nottingham, Suffolk, Gloucester, Salisbury, that means Cecil. They're all listed as witnesses to this confession. But those are not signatures, see? It's all the same handwriting. So he just says, these are the people who were here, and they all vouch for they all verify that this is true. Except they didn't sign it. So the documents are all a fraud. Now, very significant. Where does the gunpowder plot lead? It leads to civil war. Civil war. You try to build a state and a system on false flag synthetic terrorism. It's going to blow up in your face. There's the Puritans in particular, the extreme anti-Catholic, anti-Spanish party. They want to go with this gunpowder ideology more and more, like the neocons of today. Right? They want more and more 9/11 hysteria. But then the Stuarts and their man Laud, the Archbishop of Canterbury, they don't like this. It's too plebeian, it's too scurrilous, it's enough already. And ultimately then in the 1630s and 1640s, the Cecil system dissolves into the English Civil War. And I think that's a very important connection. A state built on synthetic terrorism simply cannot stand. And of course Bush, I don't know if you know this, Bush talks about 9/11 all the time. If the topic is Iraq, it's really 9/11. It's Iran, it's 9/11. If it's economics, it's 9/11. Standard Bush speak. Noun, verb, 9/11. That's a sentence for Bush. If you're interested in Shakespeare as a member of a persecuted religious minority, like if I were Muslim today in England, I would look at Shakespeare. Because that's somehow an analog to all of us, really, a persecuted minority of dissenters, or maybe we're a majority, and they might have been too. This is this German woman, Hammerschmidt Hummel. Here's what she finds. You know that there are these years in Shakespeare's life, the lost years. Nobody knows where he was. Well, she shows, with these signatures, which are somewhat faked, Arturus Stratfordus up there. He's in Rome in 1585, in the lost years. He's in Rome again in 1587, Stratfordus Castrensis. There's another one, Gulielmus Stratfordus, in the same years. The lost years were in Italy, and he was in Rome, and he's hobnobbing with the Jesuits because he likes them. The Jesuits are big on drama. Now this is an interesting one. You can say a lot about Shakespeare and the gunpowder plot, because he knows some of these people. They're Catholics like him. He's met them in the London bars. Macbeth is the first one that he writes after gunpowder. And it's got all these, the atmosphere, of course, is Scotland and the killing of kings. Some have tried to argue that Shakespeare accepts the official version. He does not. There's a famous essayist in the US who says that. No, he does not. What he's doing, he's saying to these people, you, my fellow Catholics, don't be suckers. don't get put into a false flag plot. Don't let them recruit you as cannon fodder for another one of these stunts. And again, ultimately, James is not even going to come. It's a prorogue parliament. The whole thing is a fraud. Now, just in the background, and I think this is important to understand history, which maybe not all, are the champs. And they're a collapsing empire. They're very nervous. They're very frightened. They run operations. And I just have to stress that for you. Gunpowder plot fits into their plan because they want England and Spain at war. And the key guy, I'm writing about him now, is this Paolo Sarpi. He's got his portrait here in the Bodleian Library in Oxford, that he's the guy who tore the guts out of the Council of Trent, the main church council of the Catholics in the 1500s. He has a network in England. He's got John Donne, Sir Francis Bacon, Thomas Hobbes, John Milton, Dudley Carleton. He's got dozens and dozens of people who think he's God. And this is a really important thing. Anyway, I can't really go much into it, but I wanted to alert you to this thing, except to show you Disraeli. Now, Benjamin Disraeli was, of course, Lord Beaconsfield. He was Prime Minister in the 19th century, right? The Disraeli-Gladstone period. You have to look, if you're interested in understanding Britain, the novel Coningsby, 1844, in which he basically says, there's a big party in the English nobility, the Whigs, who are the Venetian party. And that the Constitution of England is actually a Venetian one. And here's what Coningsby says. The great object of the Whig leaders, right, this is the court party, top aristocrats, is to create a high aristocratic republic on the model of Venice. In other words, that the functioning of the parliament and the parliamentary supremacy over the king is the Venetian method. Queen Anne was a struggle between the Venetian and the English systems. The Venetians win. George I is a doge, a Duke of Venice. George II, the same. George III fought, but he couldn't resist. Some of you, if you've read a lot of history and you've never heard of this, you may be saying, I don't know where you got this. This is not generally known. Coningsby says, you have had your history written for you by the Venetian party, and it has been in their interest to conceal the main stuff, the Venetians. Later on, they redirected against France, right? When Spain collapses, they can't go with attack Spain and the Pope anymore. They got to do attack France and the Pope. And that's done with this Popish plot of Titus Oates. It's about 1678. It's all based on nothing. About 30 people get killed based on absolutely nothing. And the guy who does that is John Locke, the philosopher. So if you believe in English empiricism, British empiricism, and you support John Locke, you're falling into the hands of these people. Because he's a supporter of these Whigs. We don't need to look at this too much. So anyway, the point is, think about the Venetian method as exemplified today by the secret intelligence authorities. Now, let's abstract from Guy Fawkes and from some other famous ones a general theory of false flag terrorism, okay? So you'll be ready for the next one. You've got to have a general idea of how all of these things work. So we're talking state-sponsored false flag terrorism. I recommend constant study of this chart. It's basically got three components. It's got three things that approach from different angles, three planes. The patsies, the Oswalds, dupes, useful idiots, fanatics, police agents, double agents, provocateurs. The moles, government officials loyal to a private network, part of the coup faction, putschists. Technicians are the ones who create what you actually see. The stuff that gets blamed on the patsies is actually done by these people. The patsies you see, the technicians you don't see. The patsies do everything to get noticed. A patsy is in your face. The technician, he's gone. He's not looking for publicity. Quite the opposite. So these are the old boys, the private military firms. Notice that there's a privatized command center, not Cheney as an individual, but something huge. the brainwashing by the media, sorry, the media got cut off, and the government resources are accessed via drills and exercises and maneuvers. Now let's study the patsies, otherwise known as Fall Guys, in honor of Guy Fawkes. Well, Fawkes. His expertise was digging tunnels under Spanish forts and blowing them up with gunpowder, quite similar. He doesn't ever know what hit him until he's dead. The most famous patsy of the 20th century, of course, is Lee Harvey Oswald. He's an agent of the CIA, the FBI, and the Customs. He never shot anybody, I don't think. He's simply told to be there, and he's caught up in something. He actually says on camera, "I'm just a patsy." Correct, except by then it's too late. The problem with patsies is they cannot do what they're said to do. The patsies in the 9/11 story can't fly the planes. They cannot. They don't have the physical technical ability. Oswald, using this antiquated pop gun with a toy sight, cannot shoot Kennedy. He can't shoot 7 or 8 times, which is the number of shots that we actually hear. The other problem, of course, patsies are expendable. Jack Ruby killing Oswald. They have to be silenced. They don't get to talk. And that applies to this group. Over here, of Atta, there are 2 Attas. Of Jara, there are 2. Of Oswald, there are 2 or 3 at different times. As soon as you see doubles, intelligence agencies are at work, right? Because in normal life, there's only one John Smith, right? One Joe Blow. They're not 3. As soon as you see 3, secret intelligence ops. Bin Laden, the misfit, the dreamer, the basket case. Zawahiri, his right-hand man, much more aware. Probable British agent. Smart. Goes back to the Sadat assassination here. Camp David, right? Late 70s. Carter, Begin. Sadat makes peace. Some people don't like it. Maybe the Foreign Office doesn't like it. So what they do is assassinate Sadat. This is the early 80s now. Zawahiri is part of this. Nobody lays a glove on him. He lives in London for a while, I think. Nobody touches him. Bin Laden had a villa at Wembley. Never laid a glove on him. Bin Laden himself, people who've known him have said, this guy couldn't lead 4 ducks across the road. Couldn't do it. Now you see, we've had all kinds of Bin Ladens, right? We've had a fat one, a thin one. Fat one for the winter, thin one for the summer. Jolly one, angry one. But here's one, this is a Bin Laden of a couple of years ago. Now you see, he's getting a bit gray, and of course, gentlemen, you know, when you go into the bar and try to pick up a date for the evening, you know, that gray hair just doesn't help you. So he's obviously understood. You've got to, this is the Bin Laden. This Bin Laden came out at the same time as the Rogue B-52. Just in the first 10 days of September, right before the 9/11 anniversary, they brought out this guy. Now you tell me, is that the same guy? I believe Bin Laden is a troupe of actors. I don't know whether there is any biological Bin Laden anymore. He was getting dialysis from the CIA, he was getting all sorts of stuff from the CIA. But what I can tell you is, the new actor that they've now been using to play him, we know who it is, we've discovered. That's the real Bin Laden of now. Right? This is the current main player of Bin Laden. How about this one? Sergeant Ali Mohammed is part of the Sadat assassination also. He was a major in the Egyptian army unit that did the killing. He has to flee. He goes to the U.S. He is welcomed. They make him a sergeant. It's quite a come down, but they make him a sergeant in the U.S. Army Special Forces, Fort Bragg, North Carolina. And he becomes Bin Laden's personal assistant, his valet, or his man, I guess you'd say over here, right? So he's a double agent of the U.S. and a valet for Bin Laden. What does he do? See, Bin Laden is a basket case. If Bin Laden has to move from Saudi Arabia to Afghanistan, he can't do it. He needs an assistant. So this guy organizes the move. The other thing that he does is when Bin Laden wants to bomb these embassies in East Africa, he shows him, Sergeant Ali Muhammad shows him how to do it. Now, Sergeant Ali Muhammad has never been prosecuted for mass murder of U.S., Africans, and many others in those embassy bombings. He is living happily somewhere in the U.S. in the Federal Witness Protection Program with a new identity, a new name, income for life. We don't know if we'll ever see him again. But if you do, remember Sergeant Ali Muhammad. Now, the interesting thing is, if you have a bunch of patsies, suppose you have 20 or 30 patsies, what you can do is create a counter-gang or pseudo-gang. The authority here is General, well, he starts as a major, but if he does become a brigadier general, Frank Kitson of the British Army, Gangs and Counter-Gangs. This is the textbook in the Pentagon, absolutely West Point, all these places. Low-intensity operations, subversion, insurgency, and peacekeeping. Now, what's his approach? That's Kitson. He's in Kenya in the 1950s. There's a nationalist group called the Mau Mau, and they're gaining ground. But he wants to slow down the process of independence. If you can stop it, do that too. So what he does is to create his own Mau Mau. He gets disgruntled Mau Mau veterans and others, forms them into a parallel Mau Mau, a pseudo-gang or counter-gang Mau Mau. And that group then, for some strange reason, goes out and commits tremendous atrocities, killing people left and right, horrendous stuff. That is then put in the press. At that point, the Kenyan upper classes, and there are some, the rich and the middle class and everybody else, becomes horrified by the Mau Mau, and the process of independence is slowed down. So if you have a group you want to discredit, create your own version of that group, and you can do it that way. Now, the application today is, you think there's Al-Qaeda in Iraq under the late Zarqawi? No. It's a counter-gang created by the U.S. and the British. Now, why do they need this? I can only say, if Bush did not have Al-Qaeda in Iraq to talk about, he would be in bad shape. Because he's always got to say, I'm fighting the same enemy in Iraq that we had attack us on September 11th. That means you've got to, according to their world, you've got to show it's Al-Qaeda. So who does it? Zarqawi, he's the late Zarqawi. He was in the Ansar al-Islam enclave. The U.S. was bombing targets all around him with the no-fly zone, but he escaped. Didn't touch it. They need him. Now those are the many faces of Zarqawi. On this trip this week, we've had a nightly lottery. How many Zarqawis can you see? One guy said 8. I think that may be overstated, but it's somewhere between 1 and 8. Anybody want to guess? Your guess is as good as mine, quite literally. Anybody? 4? I think 4, 3 or 4. It looks like to me, but I don't know. We have been able to do the counterintelligence job. A Hollywood Arab terrorist, a Sydney used car dealer, an Italian pedophile priest, and a New York Jewish dentist are the real Zarqawis. So, again, that's what they call Al-Qaeda in Iraq. Now let's do the moles, okay? We've done the patsies. Let's do the abstract theory of the mole. It's a person inside the government who is loyal not to the Constitution, the chain of command, the sovereign, or the laws, but to a lawless private network of bankers usually, or putschists, or criminals of some other sort. Robert Cecil the Younger. Dudley Carleton, the guy who rented the building and then became Foreign Secretary himself. How about Richard Clarke? He is the author of the myth. You know this myth you're supposed to believe in? He invented it on the morning of 9/11. He walked into the White House at 9 o'clock, 9:15, read my book, and he starts saying, Bin Laden, Bin Laden, Bin Laden, Al-Qaeda, Al-Qaeda, Al-Qaeda. He says it all day. He tells CBS, he tells CNN, he's repeating it all day long. That's where the myth came from. The connection to Bin Laden and Al-Qaeda is entirely, with some except, well, for our purposes, he's the one who did it first, and most vociferously. He put this out. There were people in the CIA putting it out too, but those are simply his brothers in arms. So he is the author of the myth, and he did it on the basis of no evidence. The only evidence he ever gave was, it's got to be Al-Qaeda, they like simultaneous attacks. Are they the only ones in the world? Did you ever hear of deception? Did you ever hear of mimicry? Maybe it's a counter gang put up by Slavovia or something like this, but no. He's a great fan. The Democratic Party loves him, and the bereaved families love him because he went into the Congress and said, your government failed you and I failed you, and somehow that was considered to be a great thing. I don't know why, but it's true. How about Mayor Giuliani, now a frontrunner for the Republican presidential nomination? He was given a warning that the Twin Towers were going to come down. How anybody could know that, I don't know. The people in the South Tower were not given that warning. The people in the South Tower, before the second plane hit, were told, stay where you are, no problem, have a cup of coffee, go back to work. So he is told, get out of the area, the towers are coming down. The people in the South Tower are told to stay. The office workers, the firemen, the police die. Hundreds of them. What's the story? He also destroys the crime scene, as you will see. He takes all the steel, scoops and dumps it, gets it out of there, doesn't care about the bodies of firemen, policemen, office workers. Ship it out, send it to China to melt it down. He also bans photography at the site. He says that's a sacrilege. We can't have it. So he destroys the crime scene. Now these are federal felonies. You can't tamper with the crime scene. And above all, you can't tamper with an airline crash scene, because that falls under the National Transportation Safety Board. He is a federal felon, and instead he's Sir Rudy running for president. How about General Myers? He's the head of the U.S. Air Force. 2 hours, no air defense. 2 hours and no air defense. Colonel Marr is the commander of the U.S. Air Force Northeast Sector, air defense. He can't get his 8 fighters in the air. He says, if I put them in the air all at once, they'll all run out of gas all at once. Therefore, I launch none of them. Not the spirit that won the Battle of Midway. And then when he does launch them, he sends them out over the Atlantic. Not good. Dave Frasca, FBI, Islamic Fundamentalist Bureau. He gets warnings from Minnesota, warnings from Arizona. There are these Arabs. They seem to be mentally unstable. They want to learn how to fly, but not to take off or to land. What should we do? He puts the reports into his desk. He gets hundreds of emails. He ignores them. Is he a mole? How about now the technicians? These are the ones you don't see, so it's a little bit harder. The patsies, of course, get the most publicity. The moles you can figure out. The technicians are harder. In the case of gunpowder, it's the War Office who gave them the technical backup that they couldn't get easily any other way. Now, if you look at Iran-Contra, you'll find that the gun running and the drug running was masterminded by the Shackley Klein's enterprise. This is the classic CIA old boys operation. This guy is Ted Shackley, the Gray Ghost. He was a speechwriter for the Bush the Elder presidential campaign. Andrew Marshall, Yoda from Star Wars. He was Rumsfeld's futurologist. This is an original 1950s Strangelove, right? Nuclear war theoretician. He's still in the Pentagon. The guy must be 90. He's always coming up with new scenarios, and he is very, very much, let's say, in the center of interest of 9/11 truth investigators. The other people we have to think about in this connection. Booz Allen Hamilton says that they can coordinate even the most complicated operations and activities. I wonder what that means. And if it's not them, DynCorp or the infamous Blackwater, they all say they can coordinate anything up to and including nuclear war. Well, that spreads a pretty wide feeler, wouldn't you say? Maybe some of the things we've been talking about. Maybe we'd like to know what they were doing on 9/11. Huh? Would you like to know that? Now, if you want to look at a good movie, you want to while away an evening, or begin to educate friends and so forth, The Package. It's a movie, Hollywood movie, very good, shows moles, patsies, technicians. It's from the late 80s, and it shows a group of US and Soviet officers who want to kill Gorbachev to stop disarmament. They want to murder him in Chicago, and they try to do it, and they don't succeed, but in the course of it, you see the entire thing. Now, I should have put this with the patsies, but the patsies have to be kept You can't just pull a patsy out of your nose, right? You got to have patsies with a track record. Now, in this case, Londonistan, right? People talk about the fact you have all of these extreme groups operating out of London. It's not new. This is now the 1840s. The King of Belgium, Leopold, writes to his niece, Queen Victoria. He says, look, in London, you have a zoo. You have a menagerie with Kossuth of Hungary, Mazzini of Italy. Mazzini is somebody people probably have heard of. Some French guys, to let loose on the continent to render its quiet and prosperity impossible. In other words, what he's saying is, you keep patsies for destabilization purposes in London. So after the fall of the empire, it becomes very much all the groups you need to destabilize India or Egypt or whatever it is, you've got to keep that in London. And that's your Londonistan. But Londonistan has a history of 150 or more years. Now, we're switching out to 9/11 exclusively. For people who maybe are coming in for the first time, okay, let's just go through some of the obvious absurdities of the official version, try to set the record straight. Then I will show you the two things I care most about. Angel is next, and the drills, and then we'll have some high comedy, and then we'll be done. Now, of course, the problem here is this is not the collapse of a building. This is an explosion, right? This is a huge apocalyptic detonation, right? You've got debris being thrown hundreds and hundreds of yards. I mean, look at this stuff. Look at these huge chunks. There's no simple collapse that could do this. And it's even more absurd when you remember that there are these 45-odd extremely strong steel columns, which are like a suspension bridge or a battleship, reinforced steel. And remember, this is a heat sink. If you think that you can apply heat to one part of this, the structure itself will convoy away the heat and dissipate it so that you'll never get the temperature you want at that point. It's like a radiator that's taking the heat far away from wherever you are. All of the pancake theories say that the floors would fall down. That's fine, but there's no force on Earth that's going to bring back, that's going to allow kerosene to eat into those columns and bring them down, as we'll see in a minute. Instead, what we see is this molten metal. The molten metal pouring out of the building. Again, this cannot be a kerosene fire. You never had your camp stove melted by the kerosene in your sterno can or anything like this. The flame on your gas range does not melt the pot or melt the framework on the top of the range. So I have to say, my book is the first book that says thermite. It does, starting in 2005. Professor Jones, of course, Stephen Jones, has now proven these things, I think, in a very adequate way and admirable way. So let's just look at one of these pieces of steel. Now, this is what Giuliani didn't want you to photograph, and he wanted to take it and melt it down, right? So there's one of the central core columns, and here's a fireman. Now look at that. You think that's been done by a kerosene fire? Isn't that rather neat? It's just been diced. It looks like an oxyacetylene torch has been at work. And of course, this is the typical way that a thermite charge would be put in. Thermate, there's a kind of a thermate collar that's put diagonally, as you see across here. And the reason they do it on this diagonal is so that the weight above will then slide down. If you chopped it just horizontally, it might just sit there for a while. But in this case, it's going to slide off, and that's going to bring down whatever is above it. Now at the Pentagon, the official story says that the plane approached in this fashion, meaning at a very low level. Now, problems here, there are lampposts, there are cars, there's a construction site, tractors, equipment parked, all kinds of things going on here. And you're supposed to fly the plane at 2 centimeters from the grass. The grass is not touched, not singed. It's amazing. All kinds of pilots say they couldn't do this, but Hani Hanjour, the misfit, has done it. They say that he tried to rent a plane in Maryland, And they wouldn't give him a Cessna because they didn't think he'd bring it back. They thought he'd crash it, and they didn't want that. So this is now Hani Hanjour allegedly accomplishing this, and that's not even what he does. He gets a 38-foot wingspan into a 19-meter hole, and now notice also, this is after the facade has collapsed as a result of fire. The original problem for Hani Hanjour is this: make the Boeing disappear into this hole of the Pentagon without bringing down the wall above. Boeing goes in there. Now I have, unfortunately, and maybe here you also see some of the debris. People have a hard time, even in the movement, saying, well, that's got to be a cruise missile or something like it. And they say, look, there is a hole, but it's here, it's behind the water. Right? There's really a hole there, but you don't see it because the water is there. Well, of course, that doesn't work because this, look, this is all intact. The windows are still there, see them? And of course, the other problem is, why are they using water? If it's an aircraft crash, they'd use foam, not water. But they're using water. And that indicates that not only was that it's not an airplane with kerosene in it, it's much more like a charge, right, an explosion, but that they knew it. They were told in advance. And here's Shanksville. Again, the issue here is the Boeing goes into this crater and disappears into an underground mine. Well, in that case, bring it up. They can bring it up. No, seriously. If they can bring it up from the floor of the ocean, they can bring it up out of a mine. The Boeing goes in there. This is impossible. The plane here has been destroyed. It has been pulverized in midair in a way which it's hard to explain. I know there's a radio talk show host in New York City called Lionel, and he says, look, this is his favorite Achilles heel. Where's the Boeing? Where's the plane? No plane. And you can read all this, you can get an adequate overview of all of this in my book. But there are many Achilles heels. Building 7 is surely an Achilles heel. Now this is 47 stories. I think in London it would be the tallest building. I think it might be here too. 47 stories. In New York, of course, it's not. It's never hit by an aircraft. There's no significant fire. There's a small fire down on the lower floors. And there's no significant damage from debris. And yet, it collapses at 5:30 in the afternoon or thereabouts, 5 or 6 hours after everything else. And it starts with the penthouse collapsing, a crimp develops, building falls in, free fall speed, collapses onto its own base, and that's it. And the fact is announced in advance. No plane. Now, the BBC had this terrible embarrassment. They say the 47-story Salomon Brothers building close to the World Trade Center has also collapsed. Has also collapsed. But wait, what do we see? Building 7 is still there. So the BBC, they do a great job. They tell you the news 22 minutes in advance of what happened. And they were not the only ones. I think CNN also told you in advance, and many others told you in advance. Now, apart from the embarrassment for this charming lady, how can we explain this? Now, here's an overhead view, right? The Hudson River being up here. This is north, more or less. South over here. So here's the South Tower. Here's the North Tower. There was a hotel here. Here's Building 7. This is Vesey Street. This is Building 6. Look at this. The outside walls are intact, but there's a huge crater in the middle of the building. And that crater seems to have emerged not when the first plane hit the North Tower, but when the second plane hit the South Tower. When the plane is hitting over here, this blows up. Very, very strange. And of course, one of the constant stories in this is the secondary explosions that are all over the place. That's the main theme of my chapter on this. And you look over here, do you think that the debris that did not bring down these structures was sufficient to bring down this one in a completely symmetrical and total destruction mode? I don't think so, because you've got Vesey Street and a couple of 100 yards in between. So that's that, and then down here, you Building 7 and the rest of the sites, including the crater, show the presence of molten metal in the basements and sub-basements. And that goes on for quite a while. And that would seem to indicate, as Jones argues, that thermate is at work. Now, the technical physical evidence, of course, is indispensable and excellent, and we've made a lot of progress. Now, where we haven't made so much progress, where I seem to be the only one talking about some of this stuff, and I hope that changes, is two things now which I'd like to call to your attention as we move towards the conclusion. And this is now the political evidence. The political evidence. And I want to show you, first of all, the so-called angel is next question. After that, I will move to the drills and the maneuvers and the way in which this phenomenon was created, I believe, through the structure of the government, but in a special way. You'll understand angel is next in just a minute. Now, here is Bush in the class here in the morning in Sarasota, Florida. And he is now going to be the target of a coup in the same way that James I was the target of a coup. Not to eliminate him, unless he really digs in his heels, but to get him to do things that the coup faction wants him to do that he's not doing, similar to James. So he's going to have, there's going to be a putsch. And he is, you may say, he's the recipient of it. And again, any notion of Bush as part of the pre-planning is absurd. They might have told him something like the following: Sonny boy, tomorrow, make sure you follow orders really fast and you'll be okay. Because that's what it's going to come down to. So here he is, and he's not going to read. You know, for Bush it would be embarrassing to sit there and read My Pet Goat. He doesn't read it, he listens to the kids read it. And then he says, reading makes a country great. Now, as he enters the classroom, the second plane hits the South Tower at 9:03 a.m. Now, at this point, we run into a tremendous problem. Because if the two planes hit, it's clear that something organized is going on. The Secret Service at this point is supposed to pick him up physically, carry him out of the known location, the announced location, put him into a bunker. They do not do that. One Secret Service agent says, we're out of here. Nothing happens. It could have been the Marine Corps guy, officer, who's carrying the nuclear codes, the so-called football. But they don't leave. And you're going to see how long he stays there. If you were doing a serious 9/11 investigation, one of the first people you'd want to call is the head of the Secret Service for tremendous malfeasance, because they violate the rules. For Cheney, they observe them. Cheney is literally picked up and carried into the bunker. Bush, not. What does this tell us? Bush is more expendable than Cheney. Cheney may also be expendable. I'll try to show you why. But Bush certainly. And again, there's a whole story here. There's what looks like an assassination attempt or a half-hearted version of an assassination attempt against Bush that morning. Buy my book. You'll read it all. Now, here's where, according to the official characters, Andrew Card, the chief of staff, says to him, the second tower has been hit, the country is under attack. We have my friend Gillian Norman, originally from Yorkshire, but now living in Australia, said at the Vancouver conference, she thinks that what he's actually saying here is Angel is next. Now, Angel is Air Force One, Bush's plane. To say Angel is next essentially means you are a target. You are next. Putting him on the hot seat. Now that's controversial, and it's more heuristic than it's a suggestion to make you think rather than an assertion. Now, let's do our pop psychology quiz. What is this man thinking? Anybody want to volunteer? Because there are two schools of thought that usually emerge. Huh? What am I having for lunch? That's what I never thought of. Anybody else?
He's afraid.
Huh?
He's afraid.
He's afraid, yeah. That's what I think. A number of people, Barry Zwicker of Canada, think that he's saying, my plan is succeeding. It's going perfectly. There's no resistance. It's all functioning perfectly. Soon I will rule the world. And I don't see that at all. I see pure terror, pure fear. He doesn't know what to do. He's absolutely terrified. And he may realize, again, if Gillian Norman is right, he just got the threat. So, again, the line that might be coming out of his mouth is, you know these adult undergarments? Adult diapers? Uh-oh, should have worn Depends. He's very frightened. Now, just sitting here like this, another interesting angle on this, if you sit like this for 15 minutes, let's assume that he's told the U.S. is under attack, and he sits there for 15 minutes. What about that? That's impeachable right there. Because if you're the president, you're supposed to say, call out the guard, launch the fleet, mobilize the divisions, send the tanks, this, that, call NATO, call the Japanese, call Putin, blah, 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 blah. He doesn't do any of that. He just sits there. And as a matter of fact, his secretary, press secretary, Fleischer, is holding up this big sign, don't say anything. And he follows orders. Now here is Angel is next. Again, most people have never heard of this. How many have heard of it? Well, that's wonderful. You're much better than the U.S. audience. The U.S. audience, the only people who know about it is my book, because I'm the only one who talks about it. And yet, this is from the New York Times, confirmed by Condoleezza Rice, the head of the National Security Council. I don't know what more they need. It is the rogue network ultimatum to Bush. In other words, it is the moment of the day when the coup faction, the actual perpetrators, the September criminals, the 9/11 makers, come out of the shadows a little bit and speak. And therefore, if you're serious about this, you grab hold of this with both of your hands and your teeth, and you don't let go, and you pull and pull and pull. If you pull that, you get them all. But the 9/11 Truth Movement, I don't know why, doesn't seem to like this. Partially because if you want to believe the simple version, right, the version that some people espouse, they say, Bush did it, Bush knew. Bush knew is a contradiction in terms, right? Bush knew is an oxymoron. How can he know anything? He's a moron. Anyway, this is the coup faction speaking. They're saying, again, Air Force One is next. And it comes in accompanied by a series of code words and top secret signals that indicate that the people saying this are well ensconced at the top levels of the U.S. government. The CIA, the DIA, the NSA, the Pentagon, the Treasury, the Federal Reserve, why not? So they're threatening Bush. Now, what is it that they want him to do? This is now, to some degree, speculative, but I think we can put it together. And again, I'm basing this to some extent on things that have been published by Réseau Voltaire, the Voltaire Network of France, the DEBCA, which tends to express the views of the Mossad, if you know them, and then the Namakom, which is a KGB old boys group of Russia. So it comes in essentially with code words suggesting that the people who are making the threat might use the same code words to launch nuclear missiles. And this nuclear thing is there. It is a built-in part of 9/11, almost never addressed, really only by me. What do they want him to do? Well, they want him to go on television and say, Bin Laden, Bin Laden, Bin Laden, Al-Qaeda, Al-Qaeda, Al-Qaeda. They want him to attack Afghanistan and declare the war of civilizations on. And the implicit thing is, if you don't do it, Bush, using conventional means, we'll do it in a nuclear form, and we'll have the war of civilizations by nuking Tehran, Damascus, Baghdad, whatever it is. Nuclear missiles can do it. It is the threat of assassination and coup, Cheney president, or if that should not work, we've got Warren Buffett at the Air Force Base here in Nebraska. We've got General Brent Scowcroft flying around in a doomsday aircraft, a flying command center. Could they have been the centerpiece of a committee of public safety? That is to say, a coup committee to govern the United States. Remember August 1991? There was a place called the Soviet Union, a committee of, the committee to overcome the emergency with Yanayev came forward. Why did it happens in the Soviets can easily happen here. Now here we go. Bush is still in the school at 9:25. That means we're 40 minutes into the crisis and 22 minutes after the second plane hits. Now it's 9:29, and he's now giving a public statement in the school. It's like saying, if you've got any air assets anywhere nearby, have a go. All right? Have it's real enough. Now here he goes, he's leaving Sarasota. He departs Sarasota. The peculiarity of how he leaves: no escort, no Air Force fighters, not one, for 2 hours. Very, very strange. And here's where he goes. He goes from Sarasota to Barksdale, Louisiana, we've seen it before tonight, to Offutt, Nebraska. Now, he could go to these other Air Force bases. Why does he go only to Air Force bases? Army bases have places to land, It looks like the Air Force is somehow the key part of the coup. That would be my interpretation. He could have gone to Army bases, he could have gone to civilian airports, he could have been gotten into bunkers or safe places. But the common denominator of these two places is that they are nuclear war command centers. Barksdale is the number 2, Offutt is the number 1. And maybe he's going there to say, disregard any codes you have coming in over the wire. I'm president, I'm here. I override those codes because those are putschists who have have stolen the codes. Anyway, that's speculative too, but the fact is he goes to these 2 places. Now here is the moment after 2 hours when Karl Rove and Card and Bush see that the Air Force fighters have arrived. But at the beginning there's a very tense moment because the Air Force is finally here after 2 hours. What have they come to do? He's getting reports constantly. Kamikaze aircraft are going to crash into you. There's an attack on your home in Crawford. Details all in my book. Here he is in Barksdale, Louisiana. And here he gives a statement at Barksdale. The funny thing about this statement, text in my book, no mention of terrorism this time. Nothing about terrorism, terrorists, terror, nothing. Here he is in the bunker at Offutt, and he goes into the bunker and he gets on this teleconference and he's talking to top officials elsewhere, and he seems to be negotiating the terms of his own survival. He is a desperate person. He is an expendable puppet fighting desperately for his life. And he succeeds by essentially saying, I'll do whatever you want. I'll turn the government over to the coup faction. That's what he does. Because remember, the coup faction is not identical to the whole government. It's a special network inside of it. Here's where the Pentagon people would have been talking to him from. And here he goes on finally, 8 o'clock at night, I think it is, goes on TV and says, we will make no distinction between the terrorists and those who harbor them. Which means, in the light of the noise all day, we will now attack Afghanistan. The war of civilization will now begin. So he has essentially given them what they want. There are many reports that one of the people telling him to go ahead and do it is Tony Blair. Tony Blair says, go on TV and tell them Bin Laden al-Qaeda. At night, there's a meeting of the National Security Council. This is Richard Clarke. And at this meeting, he says, okay, we all know it's al-Qaeda, but let's have an investigation and then we'll announce it's al-Qaeda, which they do in a couple of days. Imagine that? Is that the only terrorist group in the world? Ever hear of anything else? Ever hear of deception? It essentially means the US government has never, ever given you a real scrap of proof about this entire thing. It's all out of the mouth of this crazy Richard Clarke. So impeach him for treason and for 9/11 crimes. Now, last department of the thing is the drills. The drills. You got to learn that when a drill comes along with a scenario, you've got to shut down the drill. You've got to do drill monitoring. And you got to go out on a limb, because you got to say, the scenario of next week's drill is a menace to public safety and security. We want to expose it, we want to denounce it, we want to shut it down. Let's go to the Northeast Air Defense Sector again. Griffiths Air Force Base, Rome, New York, covers Boston to Washington and beyond. And of course, they're monitoring everything with their radar screens. Here's General Larry Arnold. He has, on his own initiative apparently, set up a little informal drill. He's got one AWACS over Washington to supervise the capital, and one AWACS over Florida, well, where Bush is. So he's got the seat of government and the president are within the purview of this no-all, see-all AWACS plan. Are these the command centers for a coup, or are these the monitoring devices for a coup. And of course, remember, the fighter planes in the Northeast Corridor are under the command of our dear friend Colonel Marr, who decides that none of them should be launched into the air. And again, a 2-hour paralysis of the air defense, right, which nobody can do except somebody in a position like this. So this is very, very heavy stuff. There's no defense. Of course, a loyal officer, some people would say, well, there are so many aircraft that are reported hijacked, he can't track them all. No, don't track them all. Put your air assets over Washington, D.C. You got to defend the capital of your country, the Pentagon, the White House, the CIA, the communications, all the rest. Congress, and let them come to you. But no, he doesn't do any of that. He doesn't protect New York, doesn't protect Washington, doesn't protect anything. Now, this is the heart of my research, and because of time limitations, I can only say, read my book, and you'll know all this stuff. On the morning of 9/11, not only on the morning, but in the months leading up to 9/11, and also planned for the weeks and months afterwards, but many of them are on the morning of 9/11. We have 25 plus drills. I mean, if I were a real demagogue, I could probably get it up to 30 or 35. But this is enough. It depends on what you want to count as a separate drill. It is, as far as I can see, the greatest density of drills in the history of the United States that morning. So that's another thing to watch out for. If there are 50 drills scheduled someday next week, it's better get on the phone and start telling people to do something about it. Now, it's just, you see, it's a complete forest of things. I'm going to pick out 5 or 6 of the most important, but the idea is every important aspect of the 9/11 events corresponds to one of these drills. Everything that you see is a scenario of one or more of these. And therefore, my contention is, when you see a drill scenario, the drill is going on, or it's just completed, or it's going to start soon, and then that event takes place in the real world, you have to say, uh-oh, the real event has been created through the drill. The drill has been taken live. The drill has gone live. The drill has been flipped live, as they say. Okay? Now, if you look at London, 7/7, wow, 3 drills going on. Not really going on. They've been completed during the springtime. Tony Blair actually talks about these. It's Atlantic Blue of the UK, Top Off 3 of the US, and Triple Play of Canada. And they all have the same scenario. Bombs in the London Underground at the same time that an important international conference is occurring in Great Britain. That would be the Glen Eagles group of 7. So when you see that, you've also got to assume that the effects may well have been created through the drills. Now remember, the drill is a way of getting something done. Under the cover of a legal drill, you make small changes, right? Instead of inert gas, you put in cyanide. Instead of a dummy bomb, you put in a real bomb. Instead of a pretend hijack, it's a real hijack. You'll see this again. From pretend to real. From fake reality to bloody reality. Of course, we also have this puzzling case of Peter Power, who goes on the BBC that night. He says, oh my gosh, my company was simulating bombs in those stations at those times. Somebody's calculated that the probability of what he asserts is 7.6 billion to 1. He seems to have made a wonderful career for himself, so I'm just very puzzled about Peter Power. I invite you to look into the matter more. He's on TV all the time, you see him, right? So here are now just a couple of the drills, right, just to give you an idea of some of the main stuff. Northern Watch is not even a drill. This is the no-fly zone. One of the things that happens on 9/11 is that almost all the fighter planes that are usually kept in Boston to New York are sent away. Where are they sent? Northern Canada, Alaska, Iceland, Saudi Arabia, Turkey. Saudi Arabia, Turkey, because they're doing the illegal no-fly zone over Iraq. So, 6 planes from the base closest to Washington, right? This is right by Washington, are sent away from August to December. So, Langley Air Force Base, which is the critical one for Washington, at least, is at 1/3 of normal strength. Now the other thing you have to know is on this day, they're running fake hijackings. Fake hijackings are part of the drills. 2 or 3 of them, the drills happen. At the height of the crisis, it's not 4 planes considered hijacked. It's something like 29. And these may well be civilian planes or military planes, real planes, flying around saying, I'm hijacked, I'm hijacked. Fake radar blips inserted on the screens of the people we've seen trying to make sense of this. And also other events that we don't know about. So it's not 4, it's something like 29. You cannot think of this day as being normal commercial aviation. It is not. It is a forest of drills, as you've seen. And one of the things that goes on, the drills are so dense, and there are so many of them, that the people in the air defense headquarters, needs, are constantly asking, is this real world or exercise? And again, I could show you dozens of these, but look at my book, I've got quite a few in there. Is it real world or exercise, right? They keep asking. You telling me it's a hijack, is that part of the drill that I was expecting, or is that something else? How about this? An officer at need says, something's wrong. Somebody started the exercise early. The hijacking is not supposed to be for another hour. Well, there you go. The fake hijacking has started early and become a real hijacking, at least in some terms, right? And exactly what that is, that's also another question. I believe that Global Hawk is used. It's a remote control technology. It's very hard to rely on somebody crashing a plane into a building, right? One of the authors in Germany, Wisniewski, he writes about, there are memoirs of kamikaze flyers who survived, right? And you can see what the kamikaze, the Japanese kamikaze flyers, essentially they're always on the brink of a nervous breakdown as they try to fly into the target. So this is inherently unreliable, even with the most zombified, drugged, or otherwise brainwashed subjects. You can't rely on them to do it. So if you're going to all this trouble and risk, you've got to make sure it happens. It's got to be some technological solution. Here's another guy at needs, early in the morning. I think this is a damn input. And what he means by that is a fake blip inserted on my radar screen as part of the drill, which is now causing chaos and making me confused. I can't make sense out of this picture. Now the interesting question is, if somebody's putting blips on his radar screen, where are they? What's the office that's putting in the blips? That should be investigated, wouldn't you think? Now remember again, strategic decapitation. If you don't put your planes over Washington, it means that you're not doing the obvious thing to defend the capital and the command structure. And since this was not done, you must conclude that some Air Force officers were indeed part of the coup. They were putschs. Here's an interesting one. Amalgam Virgo is one of the very few of these exercises. It may indeed be the only one, I'm not sure, that is ever mentioned in the Kane-Hamilton 9/11 Commission hearings. It's mentioned only in interim reports, I believe, not in the final report. So what's the scenario? A third world uninhabited aerial vehicle or cruise missile launched from a rogue freighter in the Gulf of Mexico or a barge in the Atlantic. Now, any cruise missile can be launched from the air, from the land, from the sea, or from underwater. Say under Lake Erie. How about a submarine in Lake Erie? Interesting idea. I believe this is what creates what you see at the Pentagon. An unmanned aerial vehicle of some kind launched to hit a land target. And that was done in 2001, and they're planning to do more hijacks in July, and they don't quite get around to that. So it's not clear whether that ever took place. This is the cover of the Amalgam Virgo guidebook. The Southeast Air Defense Command puts this one out. So it's counterterrorism, training for unconventional threat, and hopefully Bin Laden looks at you from the drill. Now here's the Amalgam Virgo for the coming year. A Delta 757 with real pilots, actors, actors for passengers, and FBI agents posing as terrorists through the hijack. We have no proof that Atta and company ever come near a plane. But if they did, I believe they were there thinking they were actors in a drill. It was they were double agents who'd been hired by actors to be a drill. And if you look at, because they thought they were going home, all kinds of indications. They thought they were going, Atta was going to go back to the discotheque and have a few gin and tonics that night, because that's, he probably had his charming hostess there. So they have all this. You think of these Muslim kids in the 7-7. There's this one guy who makes this film saying, "You lot, you oppressors, you imperialists." I believe that's a training film. In other words, they've said to him, "Listen, Sonny, you want to make 200 pounds in a day? Come and be an actor in our drill. And in order to be really realistic, if you were a real suicide bomber, you'd probably make a film. So let's have complete realism. Let's have you make the film." And then the poor kid doesn't realize that he's been duped into his own death warrant, because then when he gets blown up somehow, the film is then available to incriminate him. And they treat that as a real film, even though it's a training film. And he thinks he's being an actor in a drill, but the drill goes live and he didn't know it. Let's see what else we have. Everyone participates. Don't get left out of the coup. And again, you can see this. It flies across Alaska, Canada. Plane flies to crash into the capital. How about that? That's the idea, right? The specifics can change. How about this one? Positive Force 2001. Planned for the springtime, and they claim called off. I mean, who knows if it was ever called off? What's the scenario? Terrorist group hijacks commercial airliner, flies it into the Pentagon. Police. Condoleezza says, "Oh, nobody ever dreamed they could use airplanes as projectiles." Well, I could go on now. If I had another hour, I could just fill the hour with other drills that they had along these same lines. How about this? This is building collapses. On September 11th. Again, it's happening and it comes real. Well, let's, not jump to conclusions, but it looks bad, doesn't it? Now, for those of you who are real 9/11 insiders, there's also this able danger thing with Stratus Ivy, Dorhop Galley, and Land Information Warfare Service, and we have the Proactive Preemptive Operations Group, P2OG. These are more or less official agent monitoring, agent supervision activities. The able danger is not good guys who are trying to catch terrorists. It's something like this. If you have a patsy and you give him $100,000 and you say, "Take this to the terrorist there in Oman," he may go to Monte Carlo and gamble it away. So you've got to supervise him, and the way you do that is with this data mining, along with other things. And that's what this is. So this is checking up on your patsies in the modern, information age to make sure that you're doing what you say. Because otherwise the patsies are irresponsible, right? Some of them are psychotics. You've got to make sure that they're doing what you think they're doing. Now, the most scary of the whole thing, we're getting to the end, so don't despair. Global Guardian. What's the subject of Global Guardian? Armageddon. All-out thermonuclear war is being drilled that day. It's a Stratcom. It's going on that morning. And we've got Scoutcraft flying into Offutt on this Doomsday aircraft, the so-called Night Watch, Looking Glass, or Doomsday aircraft. Now, what does it mean? My friend General Ivashov was commanding in Moscow that day. He has confirmed, on the morning of 9/11, before a single airplane is hijacked, the sky is filled with B-1 and B-52 bombers, quite possibly carrying nuclear weapons, U.S. land-based missiles ready to go, U.S. ballistic submarines close to firing positions. So what is this tremendous panoply of deployment? It is similar to the Cuban Missile Crisis. And it is, of course, to intimidate Russia or China or anybody else who might decide to object to what is being done. The air is now filled with B-1 bombers, presumably with payloads. And this is well organized. Now, let me just jump ahead. Putin. at the center of 9/11 is the Bush-Putin telephone call. If your 9/11 book doesn't talk about the Bush-Putin telephone call, and mine, again, seems to be the only one, again, look again, because this is the heart of the matter. Bush says to Putin, guess what? We're seizing Afghanistan. Guess what? We're seizing bases in Central Asia. Those things that used to be part of the Soviet Union. Now remember, the Soviets fought for 10, 12 years to keep Afghanistan neutral, to keep the Anglo-Americans out. What if he had said, no, yet, I'll blow your head off. Don't you dare. Stay out of my sphere. Right? I wouldn't go to Mexico. You stay the hell out of Afghanistan. Well, this stuff flying around that day is to encourage him not to resist, because it's an ultimatum to Russia. We are taking Afghanistan. Now, this is a very intelligent person. And on this day, he could have blundered the world into World War III that day. That's why I have a thermonuclear mushroom cloud on my book cover. I don't have buildings falling down. That's the least. The real stuff is here. And as time goes on, this becomes more and more obvious. Wouldn't you agree? We've just had World War III and all that. All right. Essentially what he says is, you want Afghanistan? Please take. You have wonderful time. Right? You'll find beautiful experience in Afghanistan. We know, the British know, we know, now you will know. So he's basically saying the neocon fascist madmen are in power, and if they have their way, they're going to attack a bunch of countries in the Middle East due to the Israeli obsession that they have, right? They're obsessed with Israeli security, so they're going to attack Afghanistan, Iraq, Iran, and Russia. In the time that this is going on, Russia will be getting stronger, more solvent, better missiles, recovering, coming out of the chaos of Yeltsin and bandit privatization and all this other stuff. The U.S., on the other hand, will be more hated, more isolated, more divided, forces scattered all over the world, allies falling away left and right, internal dissent, big political problems. So essentially his calculation has been correct. You can't expect him to go immediately to World War III in the favor of other countries. It's unrealistic. But he is practicing war avoidance as best he can. So, now, the one last thing. Concerning the ability of the coup faction to launch nuclear war, the obvious one that you can see quite soon is that if they had code words to send to Bush with Angela's next, they may have had the codes, the football. But in the Global Guardian drill, there is a backdoor to thermonuclear war which is inserted. And it is to have a pretend bad insider who has access to a key command and control system. So it's a pretend bad insider, a pretend enemy operative, an enemy mole, you might say, in the Strategic Air Command, who has the ability to pretend launch nuclear missiles. But what if the pretend bad insider becomes a real bad insider with the real ability to launch real missiles? This means that there is a backdoor to thermonuclear war also here. In addition to the call in the numbers from the outside, and again, that could be blocked, right? Because if I'm Bush and I'm there, I say, you disregard that, I'm right here and I'm telling you it's not true. But the bad insider gets directly to the command and control system. He pushes the button and the missiles go up. In other words, somebody may have had their finger near the button that day. So they had the ability to launch war without reference to Bush, Cheney, or anybody else. Very important fact. And finally, they did drill the invasion of Afghanistan in May. That's called Unified Vision 01. The scenario is attack on landlocked country in South Asia harboring terrorists, no U.S. bases nearby, and searching for terrorist leader in mountains, or something like this. So it's clearly Afghanistan. It's Afghanistan. Now, I want to thank you for your patience. Now, there's a little reward here at the end. The Guy Fawkes part now, we've got to go into the scary part, okay? So what we're going to do is show you some pictures of the U.S. political class, right? The hacks and thugs of U.S. politics, and we have to ask you again, Do you want your future to be determined by these people? Are you content to have your country and your lives and your futures dragged into the abyss of war by these generally neocon fascist men? Anybody know Nosferatu the vampire? Who is it? Chertoff. This is the Home Secretary, right? Homeland Security. It's him. This is the guy who brought you Katrina. He just brought you these forest fires in Southern California. Mrs. Pelosi promised to end the war in Iraq. She hinted she would impeach Bush. She promised to end wiretapping on us. And now she's voting for a wider war, refuses to impeach Bush, and is also voting for wiretaps and anything else Bush wants. So the Democratic Party, feckless, gutless, spineless, useless. This is a tremendous crisis. We can't go into it now, but the Democratic Party is in a huge crisis because of this kind of politician, an oligarch. She says, you are advocates, but I am a leader. Get her out of there. Oust her immediately. She shouldn't be Speaker of the House. Cindy Sheehan says she's going to run against this woman. I hope Cindy Sheehan runs a real vigorous, hard-hitting campaign to get rid of her, because that's what we need. And we're looking for 468 people to do the same thing. 435 seats in the House, 33 in the Senate. Run against all of them, give them a hard time, and maybe some of them will be kicked out. Yeah. Mrs. Clinton is, of course, a warmonger. She's a neocon. There's no difference between her and Bush on Iran, except that she has said she would attack Iran sooner and better, because she can get European troops and European money that Bush can't get you. And on Iraq, as soon as Bush pulls one soldier out, which is happening now, there's no difference between her and Bush on Iraq either. Because she has said 75,000 will have to stay there until the cows come home. If you get her as president, 8 more years of Iraq war, unless the U.S. is destroyed in place, which is a bit hard to do. Mrs. Clinton, absolute disaster. She is full of complacency and arrogance. I think she has fundamentally misjudged the mood of the Democratic Party primary voter, and we will get the news on that in January, less than 2 months from now. The Iowa caucuses and the New Hampshire primary will go on. I believe she has some very bad surprises waiting for her. I think she's made a fundamental mistake thinking she can run as a thinly veiled warmonger in the Democratic Party primary, but of course I may be wrong. Now let's look at the conservative side. You know, we have a lot of very stuffy old conservatives in the U.S., the social conservatives, right, the family values types. They're very staid and very traditional, as you see here. This is Mayor Giuliani of New York, very attractive candidate, and he seems to make a habit of this kind of thing. Great social conservative, though. He's asking for the votes of the Christian fundamentalists, the family values people. So you can see that there is a big crisis in this entire thing. The old wedge issues, guns, God, gays, school prayer, flag burning, all the rest of this stuff, are dying. And just the fact that an individual like this can be the leader among the candidates in the Republican Party is a big surprise. He may also have some tremendous difficulties ahead. Al Gore, I think, is a despicable demagogue, I guess I can say. He's a great friend of Prince Charles. Everything he does is to win the approval of Prince Charles. The bombing of Serbia, he ordered the bombing of Serbia in 1999. Not even Clinton, but him. And Prince Charles seemed to want this, I think, at the time. And that is the kind of person he is. Now, he's not running, but he's got a whole coterie and following. Senator McCain, big warmonger on the Republican side, very close to the Bush policy, wants to continue the Iraq war and win it. This is a person who was in the North Vietnamese prison camp, the Hanoi Hilton, for many years. And I think he is mentally not all there. In other words, he's known to be very, very irritable and very, very unpredictable. And he has been on this anti-third world violence campaign for a very long time. Newt Gingrich, of course, remains mad as hell. He didn't get He wanted at least $50 million. He didn't get it, so I don't think he's going to run. Karl Rove was the political advisor to Bush, and you can see the kind of advice that he was giving him. This is their view of the population. They basically thumb their nose at us, and of course Bush, very strange idea of presidential decorum active here, and he manages to wrap it all in the flag. But I think the flag has been added to that picture later on now. Scariest of all, Helicopter Ben Bernanke. He's the head of the Federal Reserve. They call him Helicopter Ben. There's even a Helicopter Ben action figure you can get for your kids at Christmas. What is it? He thinks, he has said, his idea of economics is if there's a depression, take bales of dollars and throw them out of a helicopter. People will get the money, go spend it, stimulate the economy, the depression will be over. And what he has started now, as you probably have seen, is an uncontrollable collapse of the US dollar. It is the death agony of the dollar. It's ironic because 9/11 was supposed to prevent the death agony of the dollar. I've always thought the main purpose of 9/11 is to fill the world with talk of terrorism, so that any country that wanted to dump the dollar could be described as terrorist, meaning North Korea, Iraq, now Iran. Chavez of Venezuela has been accused of being a clone of Al-Qaeda because he wanted to dump the dollar, and he is dumping the dollar. So this is an indication of their failure. As you well know, we are in a worldwide banking panic. It has no end. We are in the death agony of the dollar. It is a breakdown crisis. And one of the things that 9/11 Truth has to do is to branch out. We have got to create political alternatives to deal with a depression. This is a world economic depression of unprecedented severity. And it is the dying U.S. empire. 9/11 was not an act of force. It's an act of weakness. It's a desperate ploy to keep this crazy dollar empire going. It is a failure. You can see already what a failure it is. They may drag us into World War III, but they will never be able to stabilize the US dollar. And that, of course, is what you've seen with Northern Rock. This is now the banking panic and ultimately the breadline, the Hooverville. This is our future. Unless we can create an alternative. Now here's an interesting scene. Obama, of course, is an utterly unprincipled, he's a very low-key, soft-spoken demagogue. He stands for absolutely nothing. He has called for the bombing of Pakistan, though. He wants to bomb Pakistan. How about that? Nice. This is called the politics of hope. The politics of hope and bombing Pakistan. Here's our friend Matt Dayton. He's a good Texan. He's down at the University of Austin, Texas. And he goes into this field of zombified individuals who are looking for, they think it's Mick Jagger. And he goes in there and completely changes the dynamic. Now that's an example of what any of you can do. As long as you've got strong ribs, because they're elbowing him like mad to try to get him to stop. If you've got strong ribs and some gumption, you can stand up and change the way things go. And finally, again, your war plan. Remember that when NATO intelligence set off those bombs in the Madrid subway, March of 2004, Aznar, the prime minister, neo-fascist, somebody who was a friend of Bush, wanted to declare himself dictator, caudillo, a new Franco, 40 more years of dictatorship with Aznar, except that the great Spanish people said no. 1/3 of Spain went into the streets. They didn't like Aznar's lying, and above all, they didn't like the fact that he wanted to make himself permanent dictator. Aznar wanted to call off the election. And instead, 2 million people in Madrid, similarly in other cities, said no. And it meant then that Aznar was out, Zapatero was in. And this is a country that has now escaped the parade of coffins coming back from Iraq. They got themselves out of it. And again, if you have a new event, don't have the stupid American response. Have the intelligent, energetic Spanish response. Imitate those excitable Latin peoples a little bit, the Italians and the Spanish. Get out there and protest. Don't do the American 9/11 rollover routine. Impeachment, I must say, is a mass movement in the US. There are signs of life in the United United States. Don't despair. Not all dead, not all catatonic, not all zombified, but rather impeachment everywhere. Check the lawns in any American suburb. Impeach him, impeach Bush, impeach Cheney, impeach both of them, impeach. All over the place. It is a true mass movement, and we of the 9/11 Truth Movement we've got to give it the extra bang for the buck that our issue gives, that no other issue gives.
Webster, you know, the first step was taken when Kujinik got it through the Congress. What didn't block it?
Yeah, they
It was
blocked
going to go to the House Judiciary Committee to impeach Cheney, and it went through. Both sides voted, a majority voted, so it's with the House.
Yeah, they voted, except they voted for it in bad faith. In other words, they voted for it to shunt it off into the committee. It was not a real vote. The Republicans, please, the Republicans did not vote for impeachment, except they seemed to. It's a parliamentary maneuver, don't be fooled. The problem with Kucinich is he has called for a high-profile congressional investigation of the B-52, we've heard about it, and 9/11, except that he hasn't done it. And Kucinich appears in these Democratic Party debates, and he keeps, for example, in the last Democratic Party debate, they asked him, you have been reported as somebody who has seen UFOs. Have you ever seen a UFO? And he said, yes, I have. It's a disaster. He should have said, well, Tim, the flying object I'm concerned about is not a UFO. It's the rogue B-52 with nuclear weapons on board and 6 people dead and one of them missing, and I want to know what Dick Cheney knows about it. Now, that would have been an end. That would have blown the lid off the entire debate. Kucinich has gone in these debates. He's talked about the joys of vegetarianism. He's talked about UFOs. He's essentially discredited himself in many ways.
A lot of people like it.
It's just feckless, though. It's not enough, and it's very late in the day. I would say to you, forget Kucinich in this sense. Kucinich is not a leader for you. Forget Kucinich, forget Gravel, forget Ron Paul. He has never said anything about 9/11 truth. What you must do is go and do it yourself. The only way there's ever going to be a 9/11 investigation or a 7/7 is you get into the parliament and you do it. You personally, not some member of a political class. In other words, get out of your head the idea that they have office and you don't. Get in there and fight for it. We may be on the verge of huge electoral tidal waves, right? Tsunami, landslides, because of hyperinflation, dollar crash, war. But if there's no candidate, you cannot benefit. You can't win it unless you're in it. So get in it. And the slogan of my tour, get active or get radioactive. Those are your choices. So this is my book, and I thank you for your attention.